You're listening to Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast.
When your heart is aching and your world is shaking, don't give up. No, don't give up.
Hello and welcome to Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast. I'm your host, Jana Short, and today I'm here with Tommy Dahlborg. Tommy is just a guy doing his best to play a part in breaking down the walls of the stigma around mental health and vulnerability. He truly believes in the power of being real and sharing your struggles, allowing others to know that they're not alone. This belief has led him towards starting his own podcast called the Strength Through Vulnerability podcast. Along with that, he is a financial analyst who loves spending time with family and enjoys a good donut and a diehard Patriots fan. Oh, well, I'm going to let you be on the show anyway.
Oh, man.
Well, I'm
It's
an
so
LA
good to be here.
girl, and we don't really have any loyalties here because they come and they go and they come and they go. But yeah.
I love it. I love it. Jana,
Well,
thank you so much for having me on. I'm pumped to be here.
I'm pumped to have you, like people who don't know this, but it's been really hard getting you here. So I'm so excited that you're here. And one of the things we do on the show is we share our story of hope. So I'm going to let you share your story of hope with all of us.
Gosh, it's a pleasure to. You know, when I share a bit of my story, I love to start by saying I've lived with anxiety my entire life. And I remember having my first conversation with somebody really, really close to me when I was in 7th grade. So I was probably about 11, 12 years old. And, you know, I remember opening up and saying, hey, I think I'm anxious. Which if you think back to yourself at 11 or 12, it's like, what does anxious even mean, right? Like I'm just trying to put a word to these crazy feelings I'm having. And I remember the response this person gave me was, Tommy, don't worry about it. It's all just in your head. And so naturally, I think that everybody who struggled with anxiety has heard that, a similar response. And so naturally, I felt fairly invalidated. And, you know, I continued to move on through my life. And when anxiety would creep up, I would tell myself, oh, dude, you're just making this all up in your head. It's not a big deal. Just keep pushing it away, shoving it down deeper and deeper. And as time went on, you know, we fast forward to I'm a senior in college. I'm 21 now. It's about 9-10 years later. And my anxiety is at its peak. You know, at this point in time, I actually started to experience physical symptoms from the hand trembling that many people experience all the way to essentially night terrors. I would wake up in the middle of the night, straight on, full on panic attack. I would be covered in sweat. My bed was soaking wet. It was absolutely disgusting. And my heart would be pounding through my chest. I literally thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It was terrifying. And it just continued to get worse and worse. And I remember thinking to myself that if I was going to be feeling this way for the rest of my life, I don't want to live. And so that brought up some really, really scary thoughts for sure. And, you know, essentially I got to this place where it was either, you know, I don't want to live, something bad needs to happen, or in order for me to not live, meaning suicide, or I need to open up and reach out and ask for help. And out of desperation, I reached out to this girl I was dating at that point in time. I remember having this conversation with her and just sharing how I was feeling incredibly anxious, shared a little bit about the physical stuff that was going on, a little of what's going on in my head. And her response to me was, hey, Tommy, I've dealt with anxiety my entire life. In fact, I've seen a psychiatrist since I was X years old. It was years prior to this conversation that she started seeing a psychiatrist. She was actually on medication for her anxiety too, because that's what was deemed best for her. And she's opening up and connecting with me on this level I really hadn't connected with somebody on before. And in the midst of this conversation, I go from being terrified to tell anybody about what's going on in my head to hearing her story or part of her story and realizing, holy cow, wait, from the outside looking in, she's completely normal. And she is completely normal. And she's seen a professional. Like that gives me permission to go and seek out some help too. And so I remember leaving that conversation so encouraged, just feeling loved and connected to her, but feeling like, hey, I can go and do something to better myself. And I remember talking to my parents, who are both so supportive of all I do and were very supportive of me getting some professional help. And they helped connect me with a psychiatrist that they worked with professionally, because they're both in the healthcare industry. And man, I went and saw the psychiatrist, and holy cow, it was life-changing. I started to learn more about the brain in general, but specifically my brain too. And as time went on, I was healing more and more and more. And I just wanted to be able to help other people who are in a similar position as me and didn't know how. Because I went to school for finance and management. I had no idea how to get into the mental health world. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, like, number one, I love to talk. Number two, I had been wanting to start a podcast for a while and just didn't know what to talk about. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I should probably talk about the thing that impacts me every single day of my life, which is mental health, anxiety. I later found out that a driver of this anxiety was OCD, and my belief in vulnerability and the power of stories, just like yourself and what you do on your show, inspired me to start the Strength Through Vulnerability podcast, which has been an absolute blessing. So that was a shortened version of my story, because as you know, there's so much that goes into all of our lives, but that's really what's led me to where I'm at right now.
Well, I'm really, really glad you're here, because right now, first of all, mental health doesn't really get enough attention because it's that secret that nobody wants to talk about.
Mm,
They feel like, as you said earlier, that they're not normal, but they are. It is normal. And there's so many people that are going through exactly what you're going through. And
mm,
I think that if we could talk about that openly, like even here today, just talk about what that looks like for you if you're struggling with it. Or if you don't understand, like I never have anxiety. I think I miss the anxiety gene. And when I should be anxious, it just isn't there for me. So it's
mm,
very hard for me to relate with it. Having said that, I have 4 children and 2 of them suffer severely from anxiety. And when I tell them, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Why are you so worried? Their response to me is, if I don't worry, who will? I have to worry about these things. And
mm-hmm,
I just don't get it. So for people like me who don't understand that, believe me, I have a whole bunch of other issues. OCD, I love my OCD. I tell people I got the good kind.
I love
I
it.
embrace it, my world of OCD. But I totally get it. But for people like me who don't understand that, how do we respond? How do we act? How do we help? How do we make you feel validated? So as a mindset coach, when people come to me with issues like that, I immediately step back and tell them, I'm a mindset coach. That is not what I do. I'm
Mm,
not qualified to help somebody like that. And you should be seeing a specialist that specializes in that area of help. And I move them along immediately. But how can we help validate, help listen? Because you heard that validation, your next step was to go get help. It was like your green light, go. Some
mm.
people don't necessarily see that green light go, and they either live in it or they give up.
Man, you're so right. And I think you're exemplifying the number one thing that we can be doing for people who maybe they're in a situation that we can't relate to, and that's asking questions. I think when somebody comes to you and they're struggling with something that you haven't gone through yourself, like you just mentioned, it can be really uncomfortable for the person being spoken to, because you're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do right now because I can't relate. But if you can take a step back and stop worrying about, crafting the right response and become curious, ask the questions in order to try to figure out, to try to see what they're going through and where they're coming from. And I think that will help the person to feel seen, because you are prying away, trying to really see them, despite the fact that you haven't had your own experiences like that. And I think also being vulnerable and being honest and saying that I personally haven't gone through this, but I want to show up for you. How do you want me to show up? Do you want me to be the person who just listens? Do you want a hug right now? Is it time for a hug? Do you want me to ask questions and pry further and try to get further understanding? I think that being upfront and open and really asking the other person what it is that they want from you can also be so helpful. So those are my 2 big things: asking questions and being curious, and also being upfront and saying, hey, I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I want to support you the best way that I can. what does that support look like for you right now?
I love that. As a mom of 4, I always want to fix. And I've learned as I get older that that's not my job. So I have the 2 daughters I'm talking about. One will tell me, I'm not asking you to do anything. I just need to vent and talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the other one wants that direction. Like, what can I do? What should I do next? Like, she just doesn't know and wants that feedback. So I totally get that, asking each person's individual, and they might have a different response.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think it's really common for mothers to be fixers. I know, I'm a total mama's boy, and my mom is the biggest fixer ever. If she ever sees one of her children, one of her cubs feeling sad or in a bad position, of course she wants to fix that. She wants to get rid of the pain. But I think that so often we need to remind ourselves that, every emotion is okay. And instead of just trying to fix and get somebody from depressed or sad to happy, sometimes it's best to sit with them in that sad and depression. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. That would be very hard for me to do.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be really honest. I tell my kids all the time, you're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be depressed. You're allowed to be anxious. I just don't want you to live there. It's an okay place to visit. It's an emotion and we go through it, but we go through it.
Yeah.
I want you to get to that other side and spend less and less time maybe in those spaces. But how I get them there, I have no clue, because again, that's not my zone of expertise. And if you mess with someone who might be struggling with depression or anxiety, and you are not the right expert to help them, you can make matters worse, because they're going to feel like, I don't get it. This person's an expert. I'm failing. Everything she's asked me to do, it's just not working. Why can't I succeed at this? So I'm really careful when I'm talking to other experts to make sure you stay in your lane. It's okay to say, that's not my field. I'm so sorry. I would love to help you. Let me help you find somebody, and connecting them.
Yeah. I think that's so huge too. I completely agree. And it's really hard to do coming from your position, because again, you want to fix, you want to help. So do I. Anybody who comes to me, I want to be able to answer their question, but to be able to take that, dose of humility and be like, I'm not the right person for this. That's really, really difficult to do, but it's so important to do. So I love that you're sharing that message.
Now I want to talk the other side of the coin. So for people who are struggling with those issues, with anxiety or any kind of issues that are mental health related, how do they start asking for help? How do they, like, you had a girlfriend, and what if she had not been the girlfriend that had suffered with anxiety and had been seeing someone, and she was like, well, you'll get over it, everything's fine. And that would have been a whole different journey for you. But you had someone who just happened to be going through that. So for the person who's struggling, what do you think that looks like for them? How do they ask for help and get out of the way that it's okay, that I don't feel okay right now? There's nothing wrong with that. It's normal. It's actually normal to not always be perfect and have something wrong. It's normal. How do I get there? Who do I ask? Who do I talk to? What's next?
I want to acknowledge that you're so right. I'm so blessed with the people who have been in my life to support me with what I'm going through. And so I can only hope that people out there are in a similar position. But to your point, not everybody is. And one thing I would say is that we live in a world where there are more resources at our fingertips than there ever have been before. And you know what one of my best friends was when I was trying to figure out what was going on in my head was psychologytoday.com. I love that site because it's so easy to just plug in your zip code and find professionals in your area that you can talk to. You don't necessarily need to go and see them immediately because, that does cost money, unfortunately. But you can have email conversations and go back and forth with them and kind of give them an idea of what's going on. And perhaps they'll give you some feedback too. I think that can be so powerful because it's a lot less vulnerable, really, in order to reach out to somebody who you don't necessarily know. And it's also online to kind of get a little consultation. There's also so many other websites out there that you can go to that can be really great resources that I don't know off the top of my head. But I will also say too, one of the biggest pieces of this one of the biggest pieces of healing from mental health, whatever it is that you're going through, is finding out that you're not alone. That's the number one thing. And so one thing that really worked for me when I was struggling with OCD and intrusive thoughts, I just started Googling like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And just seeing like, are there forums out there where other people are saying similar things? And lo and behold, yes, there were. And it led me to OCD and like, oh, this is what an intrusive thought is. This is the thing that's waking me up in the middle of the night in a pool of sweat. And that immediately helped to validate my feelings too and help me to realize that I'm not alone. I'm not the only, I thought of myself as a crazy person. I'm not the only crazy person who's struggling with these thoughts. And I would also say too, not everybody's blessed enough to have a best friend, unfortunately, or a community around them. But if you do have people you're close with who truly, truly, this is one of the biggest messages on my podcast. If you have somebody who you trust and who you love, that maybe they haven't been in your shoes, but you trust them enough to open up about these things, do that, because that's going to allow you to be seen. Maybe they have been through something similar and you'll teach them that they're not alone too. And that'll help start you on your healing journey too. So that was a lot, but I hope that's helpful. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It definitely does. You mentioned earlier that you would have such bad like anxiety that it affected you physically, and it does. These things will totally affect you physically, to the point where there are people that go into the ER thinking they're having a heart attack and they're just having a panic attack. And so it does affect your health, and it affects the way that you live from day to day. And what are some of the symptoms? Like if someone's saying, I just feel like I'm just super moody, or I just feel like my OCD, I didn't even know what it was till I got in the profession, but I'm like, oh, I have that, but it's the good kind. I like mine. I guess because I've learned to embrace it because I've had it for so long. But what are some of the things that people look for? Are you Googled in, like just trying to find out more about your behavior? Can they do that as well?
I would say so. When it came to my OCD, one of the biggest things about OCD that people don't understand is they kind of immediately go to the compulsions piece, that second letter in the OCD acronym, because that's what's most commonly seen, or is the easiest seen, the over like hand washing too much, or needing to be over organized. And they skip over the first letter, which is O, which is obsessive. And so there's a reason that people with OCD are doing these compulsions, and it's usually anxiety inducing. It's typically an intrusive thought of one sort or another. For people who are excessively hand washing, their obsession, their intrusive thought is a fear of germs, is a fear of virus. COVID hasn't helped people with that kind of OCD. And so to try to ease that anxiety, ease that tension, they wash their hands. They make sure that everything's spotless and clean. There's so many different kinds of intrusive thoughts out there. But if you're struggling with a thought that you think is an intrusive thought, it's causing anxiety and a lot of distress, Google that. Look into, is this a common intrusive thought for people with OCD? And honestly, I'd put money on the fact that if you have a thought that's really, driving you bonkers, that's making your anxiety show up in physical symptoms, in physical ways, it's most likely a common intrusive thought. There are so many different kinds out there. And so when I started researching what I was going through and seeing that other people had similar thoughts, man, that was so helpful. So I think that's one way. I would say my expertise, and again, I'm a financial analyst full time. I'm not a mental health professional, but I know a lot more about anxiety and OCD than I do other mental health traumas. I will say though, with OCD, if it's an intrusive thought that's really driving you nuts and you have some sort of compulsion, which can be a physical compulsion, like I mentioned earlier, excessive hand washing, or it can be a mental compulsion, which is what mine are, which is ruminations, constant, rationalization in your mind, trying to figure out why you would never do X thing, or why something would never happen, or why this isn't true about you. If those things are going on in your mind, like those are signs of it potentially being OCD. And I highly recommend that you reach out to a professional, or reach out to, if you happen to know anybody with OCD. And I think a lot of people know the signs of anxiety or what anxiety feels like, because it's an emotion. Most people, lucky for you, you don't, but most people, have felt anxiety at one point or another. But when you have, anxiety to a point that it's causing you to, not get out of bed, or not accomplish the tasks that you want to accomplish, or not be present in your day. And, you're having a tough time at work because your mind's constantly racing and worrying about other things. There's probably something deeper going on there. And again, I would highly recommend you go and seek out professional help, or at the least, again, talk to somebody who you love and who you trust. Those conversations are huge.
Tommy, I want to connect the two together because you
Hmm.
connected the OCD with having being anxious. So
Hmm.
I want people to understand what that connection looks like, because for me, when it used to be a lot worse for me, like now I literally, it's not a problem. I'm like, it's a good kind, but I could
Hmm.
not have a jar in the cabinet facing the wrong way. I obsessed over food for some reason. Like I always had to have a lot of food in my house, and I was
Hmm.
throwing it constantly away because with that obsession came me going to the refrigerator every single day, like moving things around and pulling them forward and pushing them
Hmm.
older in the back. So yeah, it was a lot of work, and I still kind of am that way, but now it's routine and it's super easy to do.
Hmm.
But I think the connection, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that when it's not like that, or somebody moves it out of place, you can't let it
Hmm.
go. Like I did used to sit there and think at night, like, did I remember to lock all the doors? Because I go through and make sure all the doors are locked, and I'll be like, did I get all the doors? I don't remember if I did the back door. And then all of a sudden it
Hmm.
becomes, you start getting anxious about it. Is that where the connection between the two is?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. It's one thing, and I love that you mentioned you have like the good kind of OCD, because as somebody with OCD as well, I have the good and the bad. I have the moments where it just locks me in. I'm just firing away at whatever task it is that I'm working on. I actually remember when I was a lot younger, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a ton of energy, which is a sign of OCD, and this desire, this like need to fold all my clothes and make sure my room was spotless. And yeah, and like that one's beneficial. That works. That's good. It definitely made my parents happy with me. That was great. But when, again, to your point, when it's the obsession that leads to this anxiety that's causing you to basically be stuck, to this anxiety that's causing you to feel like if you don't fix this, something's going to happen, or something is just not going to be right. Yes, that's when the OCD is not so good. So I think your distinction was really, really powerful there. If it's an obsession that's not anxiety inducing and it's actually beneficial to your life, don't go and see a professional about it. You're probably okay. But if you're worrying about, oh my gosh, am I going to murder this person? Like these are legitimate thoughts
Yes.
that people have. Like what if I hurt somebody with that knife that's lying on the kitchen table right there? If that's the kind of obsessive thought that you're having and it's causing major anxiety, that's the kind that you want to seek out help for. And there's nothing wrong with you. I want to clarify that too. When you have OCD like that and you're afraid of what you could possibly do with that knife, it's much different than being a serial killer. And this is the difference. The person with the serial killer gets like turned on, gets excited about that idea of using that knife to hurt somebody. The person with OCD struggling with intrusive thoughts sees that knife and is terrified about the possibility of possibly hurting somebody. It's vastly different. So if you're in that category, please know you're okay. But still seek out some help, because professionals can really help you with managing how your brain's processing those thoughts. And honestly, my OCD, it's a lot less of an issue in my life now that I've attended to it for the last few years.
And even if you have the good kind, if that's preventing you from thriving, and when I say good kind, I've just diagnosed myself as a good kind. I'm also not a doctor, but I feel like it doesn't keep me from thriving in my life and
Mm,
enjoying every moment of it, right? So I'm a
yeah.
little obsessive about the things in my pantries and things being done on certain days a certain way. But it's like now my routine, and if it gives me joy and I don't obsess on it, if it doesn't get done, and by the way, this came with me getting older, so I don't know if it has to do with getting older and letting go of more that we can't control, or if it just is like getting better. But as you get older, it's like, oh, it'll wait till tomorrow. When if you really have OCD and you're very obsessive, it cannot wait. Your brain just keeps going until it is done.
Amen. Completely agree.
Well, I have to tell you, your parents must be very proud of you, because it's very hard for, especially for men, to come forward and say that they're struggling with some sort of issue that they don't have complete control of, right?
Mm.
And to not only come forward and ask for help, but to go out and be that voice and say, it's okay, it's normal, right? It's normal for a lot of people. And there's help, there's answers. You just have to be able to go out there and access it.
Mm. I really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, you're so right. You know, my parents are my biggest supporters. They are proud of me, and I'm so grateful that they're proud of me. I can only imagine this would be that much harder if I didn't have their support to do what I'm doing. But yeah, so grateful for them and everybody out there. The message of your show, Jana, is we all have a story and we can use it to change people's lives for the better. And so I just want to encourage everybody who's listening to this show, like, use your story. It doesn't need to be in the form of a podcast, but use your story because you got it for a reason. And I also want to say too, for all the young people listening, like, I'm 24 years old. So I wanted to mention that just so that, you know, for relatability, I'm pretty young. Still have so much to learn, and yet it's okay to talk about these mental health struggles. I just want to make sure that that's so clear too.
By the way, I think it's super incredible and powerful when a man steps up and says, hey, I'm not perfect. I struggle with that too. It makes him so relatable to me. And by the way, it makes you relatable to so many other people. They're not saying it every day and whining about it, but they're literally saying, I've got a problem too. I deal with that too. And had your girlfriend not shared her story and had been ashamed or thought you would judge her and just didn't say anything, your journey would definitely have been different.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know what it would have looked like, but I'm so grateful she did.
So I'm grateful you're sharing your story. Let's talk a little
Thank
bit
you.
about what people are going to learn on your podcast. Like, what are they going to hear? Are they going to hear
Mhm.
more stories, something that's very relatable to them? Because again, maybe your story won't relate to everybody, but one of
Mhm.
theirs might. So they might hit their pain point. And when they're listening, it's going to be like, oh, I think they're talking to me. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like that's my story, just a little different. And if he did it, so can I.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, thank you for letting me share a bit about my show. There have been so many incredible guests. I think, it's been going on for a little over a year. I think I've had 50 or 60 different people on the show already. And it's been so inspiring to hear so many different stories from, I've had professional athletes on the show to entrepreneurs, life coaches. I've had the honor of having my dad on the show a couple times and my older sister, who are all so inspiring to me. And there's stories of depression and how they overcame it. There's last week, actually, the episode that came out was about a man who has overcome alcoholism, and he also cheated on his wife, and he was able to mend that relationship back together too. So there's stories like that. There's stories about people struggling with anxiety, OCD as well, be it me and also a few other people who have come on the show. I also talk about, there's the mental health stuff, but there's also the physical disabilities too. I've had a few people who specialize in, well, actually, they're both physically disabled themselves. And so they're doing incredible work around America to try to really help provide these people with these physical disabilities with the opportunity to get jobs. And we talk about the struggles and why that's so difficult in this current environment. I've had people come on and talk about relationships and the role that vulnerability plays in relationships. I mean, part of my story, like you just mentioned, was me opening up to my then girlfriend back in college. Another part of it is when, my current girlfriend, I remember opening up to her and telling her that I had OCD for the first time and was terrified because I was telling her after she heard an episode of me talking about how one of my intrusive thoughts is that I would possibly cheat on a girlfriend. Like, that's one of the intrusive thoughts that I struggled with. This fear of, what if I cheated on this girl who I love so much, that I care about so much? Super vulnerable conversation. I was terrified. And yet when she was like, Tommy, I'm like so glad that you shared that story, like with the world, but also with me. and I love you despite that. Like, holy cow, that just brought us together that much more. And so there's also talks about vulnerability's role in leadership and so much more. So seriously, people, if they want to check out the show, they will find something that they'll either be interested in or that will be relatable to them for sure.
Well, we're definitely going to put the link in this show. We're ready to hit 200,000 subscribers. So I want all of you to go and hit up on his show and support him, because the more voices on his show and the more people he's able to reach, the more he's going to put that ripple effect of help out into the world. So Tommy, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it. I'm very proud of you. So yay.
Thank you so much, Jana. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been so much fun talking to you. I'm so glad after a few months, we finally made it happen. It was so good to be here.
I am too. I'm really grateful that we have you to share that story. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast. Make sure to visit Jana's website, bestholisticlife.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, or listen there, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you simply tell a friend about the show. That'll help too. Let's change the world together, one health expert at a time. Looking forward to seeing you next time.